How did you find it sort of like learning the biblical languages?
You see, that's a good question because I remember that at the time, and I think it's still the case in Brazil, and I think that it's the case in some other parts of the world. I think that one of the struggles I had with the biblical languages was because the lecturers tended to focus on grammar most of the time. So I had 2 years of looking to aspects of grammar, syntax, and I think that I missed having more contact with the text of scriptures
Mm.
itself. And I
Yeah.
wish I had had people who would walk through the text with me in the classroom at the time where I was focused 100% on learning the languages. And I think that it's by
Mm.
reading the text and applying the grammar as you read the text that you really get excited about them, about the languages. And you get to understand why you're doing that, and you get to understand the value of doing that. You get to understand the
Mm.
devotional aspect of reading scriptures in the original languages. And I think that that is still one of the struggles we find in our
Mm.
seminaries in Brazil. And I wish we had a change of method and we started with the text and then made it more,
Yeah.
let's say, made it easier and more excitable to our students. So I found it daunting at the time. I found it a little bit difficult. Although I liked the
Mm.
languages, I thought it wasn't a very pleasant experience some of the times.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I definitely I understand the difficulty. Fortunately, I was taught a bit different, and also what we apply in Greek tutoring is a different method, where there's text reading almost from day one, like you would have with a modern learn. If you were to learn, if I ever want to learn Portuguese, that is how I would do it. I would learn how to say my name and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah,
If you want to read a text in a language that's not spoken anymore, I think it's very important that we get to the texts very quickly.
yeah.
Also to keep the motivation, just as you just articulated very well, I think. And I really appreciate you articulating that because I think that it's not just a problem in Brazil. It's generally a problem, I think, in America. It's also broadly a problem in the UK. I don't know exactly about like how they in Denmark, whether it's that the same way where I'm from, that it's not always that way, but it can be. I think that there's lots of and I don't know when that occurred because that was not how people were taught Greek in the Middle Ages. I don't think. So we have in Antiquity we have a 3-step method that we work with, which is yeah morphology and grammar learning on one hand, then um, text reading, which just has the primary focus of the way we do things here
It's
in
fascinating.
and then tailored vocabulary learning so that you learn vocabulary in advance before you actually get to the text. So in theory, we will never see a text where you don't know the words.
Mm, mm, yeah,
And I think that that is as close you can get to modern learning way, or at least a very close way to simulating modern language learning.
yeah. I'm with you. Yeah,
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. So, so I hope that you can change that in Brazil as well to a
I
more
hope
sort
so
of
too.
yeah
Thank you.
yeah because it yeah yeah. But I just had a student who was taught in a seminary where they would be completely discouraged from reading the Bible in Greek, which is I think that's absurd, but that's completely different.
Yeah, I keep telling my students that the languages, they should be taken as the most important. I would say that, let's say, one of some of the most important bits of training they would get from a seminary. It's something that they can take for life.
Hmm.
It's not just the content, but it's the skills to interpret, to understand. And I think that
Yes.
I can see, at least in Brazil, and I can speak for my country, I can see the reflection of not being able to read the text well in our pulpits. So, in the quality
Hmm.
of our preaching in this nation, I can see aspects of that lacking of proper training in the languages in our pulpits.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly, and it does affect the way we read scripture.
Definitely.
And could you like kind of share your experience of how that the biblical languages has opened up scripture for you?
Yeah, for me, I think that I like to spot the rhetoric and the style of the authors. So I'm reading it and to compare the differences in their styles and rhetoric and the devices they use to communicate the truths that they want to communicate. And I find that very difficult. It is very difficult in a translation, although we do have great translations, both in Portuguese and even more so in English. I think that for us who work with scriptures, who work at teaching scriptures, we should be able to enjoy the style and the rhetoric and the construction. And I think that that is clearer in the original languages. We can see what the author is doing with the text, how he's playing with the words in the text through
Yeah.
the reading of the original languages. We can also, in my experience, it was really interesting once I got into the languages to compare and see the original text with the translations I had. Although they are good, it was good to see what was going on with my translation, and at least to try and figure out why the translator got to that particular translation in those particular places and compare that with what was written in the original languages. And I think that that opens up a world of nuances, at least, of the message of scriptures.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very powerful. I think that there's definitely the element of style and nuances, which have been articulated by many people on this podcast, and I've also myself emphasized that a lot. Um, but also what I actually discussed with one of your countrymen, Dennis Salgado, um, is about like how that also closes off interpretations or opens up interpretations.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, do you have any sort of specific examples of where you have seen something new or something in scripture that you didn't see before?
Yeah, I think that it touches on what you just said about opening up new levels of interpretation. I think that a couple of examples. One of them is it's a more it's a simpler example, but in Romans 12:7, we read, "If it is service," Paul is listing some gifts, and then he says, "If it is service, then serve. If it is teaching, then teach." All right, so most Portuguese versions translate this verse as something like, if it is service, then let us take great pains to serve. If it is teaching, let us take great pains to teach. This is quite similar to the ASV and King James Version, right? So I think that the translators found that something was missing. They wanted a verb here. So if it is service, then serve. They wanted something more, another verb. So uh, let's be diligent in serving. So once I heard a sermon, then back in the day, I heard a sermon in which the preacher took great pains to elaborate on the idea of taking great pains to teach. So he focused on taking great pains as he encouraged preachers and Bible teachers to take their teaching duties seriously. So he went on and on, elaborating on what Paul had said about taking great pains to teach. So how surprised I was to realize that the Greek only said, "He who teaches in the teaching." And Paul's point is not about our attitude towards the execution of our gifts, such as being conscientious teacher, as that preacher made it to be. But his point is rather that we should devote ourselves to the gifts we have received. So you can see that the preaching was conditioned by something in the translation who shouldn't be there, right? And then it kind of missed the point Paul was trying to make. A second example is a more theological, significant one, because
Thank you for watching this clip. If you enjoyed it, you can find another one by clicking just over here. Or if you want to watch the full episode and dive a step deeper, you can find a link in the description below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.